Hello everyone, dear friends. Ruslan Belov here with you again, and today is May 4th. I'm glad to see each and every one of you on the channel. Before we get into the briefing, I want to make one important request. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it right now. It takes literally 1 second. And make sure to hit the bell and select all notifications. The thing is, YouTube is actively fighting this type of content. Military analysis, geopolitics, all of it falls under algorithmic suppression. The channel doesn't get promoted, notifications don't reach subscribers, reach gets cut. The only thing that genuinely helps in this situation is your live engagement. Subscribing, the bell, a like, a comment. Every one of those actions signals to the algorithm that the content is in demand. So, support the channel. It costs you nothing, but it means everything to us. I also want to thank our sponsors and everyone who supports the channel through Super Thanks. It's noticed, it's appreciated, and it's what keeps this work going. Thank you. And now, down to business. Today's episode is going to be a packed one. The Strait of Hormuz. Trump announces the start of the unblocking operation. Let's start with the headline that's been ricocheting through global media since this morning. Donald Trump announced the launch of a naval operation to unblock the Strait of Hormuz. According to his statement, approximately 15,000 troops and dozens of U.S. Navy vessels are already involved in the operation. The official objective is to restore free passage through the strait and escort civilian ships out of the blockade zone. Why is Trump doing this now? The answer is on the surface, and it's purely economic. Fuel prices in the United States keep creeping upward, and this is already hitting the real economy, not in the abstract, but in very concrete terms. It's enough to note that one of the largest American airlines, the seventh largest by fleet size in the country, has declared bankruptcy. 17,000 employees found themselves out of work overnight. That's not just a statistic, that's a political bomb inside the country. Trump understands perfectly well. If oil doesn't come down, the next round of news will be even worse. The price per barrel is currently sitting around $109, $110. And according to some reports, actual over-the-counter deals are being struck at even higher prices. A catastrophic price shock, the $200, $300 range, hasn't happened yet, but if the blockade holds, it is entirely plausible. Meanwhile, Iran is not standing still. The Iranian supertanker, Huge, a vessel carrying over 1.9 million barrels of crude oil, valued at approximately $220 million, successfully broke through the U.S. naval blockade. The tanker is currently transiting the Lombok Strait in Indonesia, heading toward the Riau archipelago. This isn't just logistics, it's a demonstrative gesture, signaling that the blockade is not 100% airtight. Iran's peace plan, 14 points and a cold reception. Running parallel to the military maneuvering is a diplomatic storyline. Through Pakistani intermediaries, Iran has delivered a comprehensive 14-point peace plan to the United States. In essence, it is Tehran's response to the earlier American proposal for a 2-month ceasefire. Iran's position is notable for its specificity. Tehran doesn't want a prolonged ceasefire with an undefined endpoint. It insists on ending the conflict within 1 month. Among the key conditions, non-aggression guarantees from the United States, withdrawal of American forces from adjacent regions, lifting of the naval blockade, unfreezing of Iranian assets locked by Western sanctions, payment of reparations, full removal of sanctions pressure, cessation of hostilities on all active fronts, including Lebanon, and the establishment of a new international mechanism governing navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's key concession, for its part, is the readiness to immediately unblock the strait, with no preconditions and no delay. Objectively speaking, this proposal is not without pragmatic merit. It addresses most of the painful pressure points for all parties involved, including the United States itself. The one side for whom this kind of settlement is categorically unacceptable is Israel. Tel Aviv is consistently pushing for internationally binding guarantees that Iran will never acquire nuclear weapons, and this peace plan effectively leaves that issue untouched. Trump rejected the Iranian initiative and did so demonstratively before he had even read the full document. In a social media post, the American president wrote that Iran had not yet paid a high enough price for what it had done to humanity and the world over the past 47 years. That is not the language of diplomacy. That is rhetoric aimed squarely at a domestic audience. Nevertheless, negotiations do not appear to be fully frozen. Iran has expressed readiness to begin direct talks in Pakistan as early as the start of next week, should Washington show a reciprocal interest. The bottom line as of today: the blockade continues, oil is expensive, Trump is preparing for a ground phase, and the diplomatic window remains slightly open. But not for long. The front, Lyman sector, crossing of the Siversky Donets. Now let's move to the main theater of operations. We'll begin with what can, without exaggeration, be called today's tactical headline. On the Lyman axis, fighters of the West grouping carried out an operation that stands out from the general backdrop in terms of both complexity and audacity. Russian units successfully crossed the Siversky Donets River and established a foothold in the village of Prishib, and not merely on the outskirts, but with stable control over its entire eastern section, the part that borders directly on the river. This deserves special emphasis. The Siversky Donets is not some minor creek on a map. It is a serious water obstacle, comparable in crossing difficulty to a number of major European rivers. You can't simply push infantry across on pontoons under fire. What's required is a separately planned, technically supported crossing operation with air cover and artillery coordination. The fact that Russian forces pulled this off and are holding the positions is not an ordinary event. Now, on the strategic implications. If Russian units manage to hold Prishib and develop the success, two obvious vectors open up for the command. The first is toward Kostiantynivka, which creates opportunities to finally squeeze Yarova and reach the key heights commanding the approaches to Sviatohirsk. The second theoretical vector is southward, towards Sidorov, but that option is far less realistic. Logistics across the river will be extremely difficult, and supplying a grouping cut off from the main crossing points would be a permanent vulnerability. The northern variant, toward Kostiantynivka, therefore remains the most likely and most promising. Another important piece of news came from the sector to the east. According to reliable information, Russian fighters have entered the village of Stariy Caravan. This has not yet appeared on maps, there's no objective confirmation, but the sources are solid. And the significance of this settlement is hard to overstate. Stariy Caravan is effectively the key to Lyman. With its fall, only about 1 kilometer remains to the city's last remaining supply road. The moment that road comes under effective fire control or is physically cut, the AFU garrison in Lyman faces operational encirclement. Yes, for a time the units will be able to hold on, receiving ammunition and supplies via drone, but the capacity of such logistics is fundamentally limited. Taken together, the available data suggests that the story of Lyman's defense, if not approaching its conclusion right now, is at least coming into view on the horizon. Kramatorsk, Kostiantynivka, Dovhabalka. On the Kramatorsk sector, no dramatic shifts, though video footage from positions has come in confirming active operations in the area. On Kostiantynivka, Russian forces continue their methodical displacement of Ukrainian positions. Over the past day, 4 streets in the private residential sector came under Russian control, along with 8 multi-story buildings. The pace is not rapid, but it is consistent, and that is characteristic of urban combat, where every block has to be taken separately. The advances are concentrated in precisely that part of the city, which is in a state of semi-encirclement. And it is here, as was forecast in earlier episodes, that the intensity of engagements has been escalating in recent days. In the Dovhabalka area, the picture is similar. A large area east of the village has been cleared, and the zone of control within the settlement itself has been expanded. Full clearance of Dovhabalka has not yet been completed, but judging by the dynamics, it's a matter of the near future. Doriilia sector, Belitske and the closed pocket. On the Doriilia axis, several important clarifications. The reports of Belitske having been taken appear at this point to have been premature. A week has passed since the first publications, and no confirmation from independent sources has appeared. That doesn't mean the event didn't happen. It's possible the situation there is more complicated and information is being deliberately held back. But until objective control footage appears, it's too early to mark this one down. What is confirmed, over the past day, territory to the east of the city was cleared, and an advance north of Novyi Donbass was recorded. A separate event deserves attention. The pocket north of Pokrovsk, which was discussed in previous episodes, has been closed. To recap, approximately 24 AFU servicemen found themselves trapped in tree lines and lost the ability to break out in an organized fashion. Only 3 managed to get out. The rest were killed. It is a local episode, but an instructive one. Situations like this are the direct consequence of losing positional coherence and command and control on particular segments of the line. Zaporizhzhia axis and the Orikhiv sector. No significant changes in the east zone. However, on the Orikhiv axis, a notable advance has been recorded. Units of the Dnipro grouping, operating from the direction of Mali-Shcherbaki, advanced more than 3 kilometers along the highway toward Novoandriivka. Here it is necessary to maintain analytical sobriety. Orikhiv from the south is virtually impregnable. That has been obvious from more than 4 years of combat operations on this axis. Movement along the highway alone does not resolve the strategic problem. The city can only fall once the east grouping creates a threat from the north. Until that happens, pressure from the south is about pinning the enemy and tying down his reserves, nothing more. And now, the most uncomfortable subject of the day. Zaporizhzhia Oblast, the Ukrainian counteroffensive, results. Russian mappers, independent monitoring cartographers, have begun publishing revised data on the situation in the southern sector, which now effectively coincides with what Ukraine's deep state platform is showing. The difference is that deep state traditionally lags by weeks or months in its updates. The fact that Russian mappers have now acknowledged this picture is itself a telling signal. The results of the Ukrainian counteroffensive in Zaporizhzhia Oblast look as follows. Russian forces have been pushed back to roughly their positions of last October. Primorsk has almost entirely passed under AFU control, at least its northern and central sections. Russian presence in the southern part of Primorsk persists, but the sustainability of those positions is in question. As for Stepnohirsk, the situation is complex. According to Russian maps, the front line passes along the northern outskirts of the city. According to Ukrainian semi-official sources, fighting is already taking place inside the city itself. If the latter is accurate and Russian forces have been compelled to pull back behind the river, then talk of any advance to the Konka River and the creation of a bridgehead at the approaches to Zaporizhzhia is premature. It bears remembering that when Russian forces stood on the Konka, the outskirts of Zaporizhzhia were roughly 15 kilometers away, and drones were already operating over the city. That distance has now grown again. Confirmed as having passed under AFU control are 3 settlements: Lukyanivka, Novoboykove, and Novoyakivlivka, though this represents roughly a week of combat activity, not a single day. The Ukrainian side has recently been deliberately downplaying its own operational successes, which complicates timely analysis. The seizure of Stepnohirsk by AFU in the first place was no trivial accomplishment. A chain of heights, water obstacles, difficult terrain, all of it made holding the city operationally critical. Clearly, Ukrainian command redirected serious reserves to this axis and made it a priority. Projecting a rapid restoration of previous Russian positions here would be unjustified optimism. In all likelihood, substantive changes in this sector will only become possible after Orikhiv is taken from the north, followed by a push to the Konka. And that is not a matter of 1 week, and probably not 1 month either. Kharkiv axis. In the north of Kharkiv Oblast, in the triangle of Volokhovka, Zibyn, Bochkove, Russian forces continue methodical alignment of the front line and expansion of the buffer zone. The initiative here remains solidly on the Russian side. Looking ahead, Okremivka, Malavovcha, and Rybyn may come under Russian control, gradually forming a coherent buffer along the state border. The more distant strategic objective in this area is a push to Veliki Burluk and the final straightening of the Russian-Ukrainian border. But that is a horizon of years, not months. The pace of the advance here is unhurried. Objectives are addressed cautiously, without forcing events. Cuba and the US troop withdrawal from Germany. A few words on developments at the periphery of the main theaters. Cuban President Diaz-Canel has issued a public statement about what he describes as an escalating threat of American military intervention. According to him, Washington is exerting military pressure on Havana, and he has called on the international community to demand that the United States abandon this course. No aggressor, however powerful, will find anyone surrendering in Cuba. Those were Diaz-Canel's words to the country. Whether this threat is serious or whether it is primarily an element of informational pressure remains to be seen. From Europe, Western media report that the United States intends to cancel the decision to deploy Tomahawk cruise missiles in Germany. The director of a Berlin-based analytical center described this as a more serious problem than the troop reduction itself. Trump, for his part, clarified that far more troops than the initially announced 5,000 will be withdrawn from Germany. Against a baseline of 80,000 to 90,000 US personnel in Europe, withdrawing 5,000 is not in itself catastrophic. It complicates logistics and slows command and control. But everything depends critically on which specific structures are withdrawn. If the headquarters in Wiesbaden closes, the facility that coordinates American military support to Ukraine through the Security Assistance Group, that will be a far more consequential signal than any numerical figure. That is everything for today on the line of contact and the operational situation. As always, we track the developments, we don't jump to premature conclusions, and we wait for objective confirmation. The situation on a number of axes remains fluid, and the next 48 to 72 hours may provide a clearer picture, particularly on the Lyman axis and in Zaporizhzhia Oblast. Thank you for being with us. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next episode.